after so many years. It's amazing. It really is amazing, to be honest with you. Like, it's obvious what's going on here. You know, creating this type of manufactured outrage for the purpose of engagement farming. And if you're a really good grifter, profit, you know, monetization incentives for acting this way, for calling stuff woke, or for being overly negative about something before even playing it. Again, they do it for everything. Games, movies, shows, I mean, entertainment in general has been overtaken by these weirdos.
Something is off. Like, right off the bat, something is off. It looks weird. As in, maybe it's the same feeling people from the United States get when they watch an anime and... or how Japanese people depict like the Western countries or United States. I can tell right away, like, I don't, like, how could they do this? Like, they did no research at all. Everything, the buildings, the settings, like, it doesn't look like Japan.
It's very entertaining how people are fighting over Assassin's Creed Shadows. We've got arguments sprouting because a lot of Japanese people are having an issue with things being shown in this game, such as the desecration of shrines and the fact that the main character can kill civilians. Then on the other side of the argument, we have people basically telling Japanese people to shut up and that they're idiots for having an issue with their culture being disrespected in an American video game that's deciding to appropriate their culture. So I went on Twitter and here's this Japanese guy named Kondo Shohei who put up this tweet: "Wake up, Ubisoft defender, and hear our voice. What kind of Assassin's Creed game destroys an actual religious site? Japanese culture is consumed but receives no respect. Here's a perfect example." Then he shows this clip with Yasuke, or whichever character I guess you choose to play, and it says Itate Yozu Shrine. I guess that's the religious place, and you can see these people obviously are religious, but here's just a quick clip of it. So those are civilians, because people were saying, oh, you can't do that, you can't kill civilians, or you can't hurt them, whatever, but those people they don't seem like antagonists to me, but... Okay, so that's the clip. And then there's an argument that breaks out because in response to this guy, someone replied, call whatever his name is. But he says, "You literally control the buttons you press. If you decided to do that, that speaks more about you than the actual game." This person later on said that they're mooting this thread. The racists and those pushing the agenda outed themselves, which I find very interesting because this person is basically making excuses to defend a game that made it possible to disrespect Japanese culture, and then when a Japanese person speaks out against it, he is gaslit with the utmost condescension. But let's talk about why this can be an issue. There was context for certain acts of destruction in other Assassin's Creed games, but for the most part, from what I've seen, the cultures are respected on a whole. And even if this company has disrespected other cultures, which I'm sure you can find that in some Assassin's Creed games, does that still make it okay to do so? Does it still make it okay to do so for this culture? Let's say those other cultures don't really care if their historical representation is disrespected. Japan clearly does. I could be wrong, but I've yet to see a Japanese work where a Japanese person comes to America, annihilates all the American citizens, cuts them down, and desecrates their monuments. Imagine they start burning down the founding father statues, trans flags, American flags, LGBTQ flags, museums, churches, grave sites, things that America holds near and dear. What if they made an anime about that? What if they made a game about that? And then when American people got upset, Japanese people told them, shut up, Americans. It's up to the player what they do. So if you end up having a character that burns one of your flags that you identify with, then that's because the player chose to do that. That's not our fault. On another note, what if the player was given the option to say a racist slur? The player doesn't have to say it, but the game has been developed in such a way that the player can say it if they choose to. I know some people might, but you know, they probably don't think that that's a fair comparison, right? And that's okay. But to the Japanese people, when it comes to offense based on their culture, it's kind of the same for them. You literally develop that into the game. It's interesting how America will bend over backwards to get the sweet money of the Chinese people and other overseas markets, but for some reason when it comes to Japan, they'll disrespect that culture and tell them to be okay with it. They'll censor all of Japan's works when they come into America because it's offensive to Americans. You know how many times freaking anime have been wrongly dubbed, changing the artist's original work because one word or something they said in the original script was somehow offensive, and even though that's normal for Japanese culture, the Americans find it offensive, so they wrongly dub it with something else that has nothing to do with the original work. But now you want to appropriate and make money off of their culture, and when they say they're offended, you keep pushing forward and tell them to shut the hell up, and then you have the nerve to call people racist. The people who are pointing this out, you call them racist? Nobody sees this as Asian hate, by the way. The people who apparently stick up for the Japanese people who aren't Japanese are racist as well by calling out racist behavior and cultural appropriation, like, you know, actual cultural appropriation. And there is a difference. There is a difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. When you appreciate a culture, you still respect that culture. You can take creative liberties while still showing respect. That is cultural appreciation. When you use that culture as a backdrop to make a buck, disrespect it, mock it, act like an idiot, and when called out, your response is,
"'Cause fuck 'em, that's why."
That's racist. Now, I know some people might argue that games should just be made, but what I find rich is that a lot of these AAA studios will hire consultant firms that claim their function is to make sure people are mindful of other cultures and ethnicities. You know, when they talk about looking into own biases and stuff, that's part of what they claim they mean, you know, promoting diversity and all that, but then they turn around and do the very thing they claim to be against. I just don't understand, and I love how people will use the excuse, well, in this Assassin's Creed, it was fine and nobody had an issue with it. That's not the point. Japanese culture is not the same as other cultures. You're using their culture to make money while you're also trying to sell the game to them. Unless I'm wrong, are they not going to sell Assassin's Creed Shadows in Japan? So you're expecting to sell the game in Japan, and you thought that this was going to go over well after pissing off the Japanese people who are extremely strict and take pride in their cultural representation and identity, and you thought it was going to be completely fine to just go ahead with it anyway, not change anything, and keep selling the game and expect them to buy it. I don't even know why they're putting out this game as is right now. I know they're trying to make changes and stuff, but like every single thing about this game is cursed. I know another argument is that people are having an issue with Yasuke killing Asian people, as the guy in the first clip pointed out.
I mean, I understand where the outrage is coming from. Of course, they have problems with Yasuke being the main protagonist, calling it racist and calling it forced diversity despite being an actual historical figure from the past.
Well, we talked about that. But anyway, and you see the response here. And one person said, completely idiotic. If it's racist for a black person to kill Asians in Assassin's Creed Shadows, then it's racist in any game if you kill any NPC that isn't the same race as the character that you're playing, historical or otherwise. That does not make sense. Now, at first, I didn't agree with this because I'm sure there are other characters in other Assassin's Creed games that go around killing people who don't look like them. But the thing is, Japan is just now coming around as a historical homogenous society to accepting black people or dark-skinned people, or just people who are darker skinned that don't look like them. There are a lot of old school Eastern Asian people who are very prejudiced against darker skinned people. Yes, that is changing, and that's good because a lot of them have had bad representation on TV about black people. That's what they've been seeing. Like, I actually talked to someone about this, another Asian guy, I think he was Korean, South Korean. And he was like, wow, I didn't know that black people could be nice because I've only seen them being violent on TV. And he was just being honest. That's the only representation he's had of black people being thugs. And that's something that America has to deal with. That was America's own representation of black people. So yeah, clearly what didn't help is the media perpetuating that. And in light of all of that, they really thought that especially now was a good time to make a character who isn't Japanese, a huge, big African dude going around slicing up a bunch of Asian people, especially giving them the option to do that with civilians. I don't know, man. Now wouldn't have been the time to do that. And I already explained why. I have a whole video on that too, and the whole thing with Yasuke. And it's pretty wild that this Assassin's Creed is set in ancient Japan, and yet they made Yasuke the main character instead of, you know, an addition. It was probably tone deaf. And then on top of that, they give the character the option to desecrate sacred places. on top of everything else. It just seems like the studio is setting up the character to fail and then, you know, hiding behind the coattails of people fighting each other. And I don't want to hear the whole thing, oh, they hate him just because he's black argument. Maybe there is some of that. There's some legit racists out there. I'm not discounting that those exist or not, especially from the Asian countries. But then why would you make it so that the character has the option to also disrespect their culture on top of that? You don't see how that sets up a bad representation for dark-skinned people even further? Also, just calling people grifters and racist simply because they're pointing out that the developers who claim they care about cultures should be taking more care in how they depict Japanese culture, which has a very strong cultural identity, is crazy. Because guess what? If other communities came out, like the Muslim community, Islam, the Hawaiian community, the trans community, and I'm only using those communities as examples because if you so much as mention something that could be deemed offensive to them, these studios will tear you apart, right? The studios will immediately backtrack. And we've seen this even with certain communities, ethnic communities in the US that you're not allowed to criticize. And even if the offended group is tiny, like 0.5% of people, these studios will risk losing money just to avoid offending them. But an entire country and its culture, this specific country and culture, that's fair game. Why? Because you think they won't fight back? Is it because they don't make much noise and they're too polite? So when they do speak up, you think they're pushovers and you can just keep stepping on them? I'm just saying, these companies don't keep the same energy and neither do the people defending them. But then we get into the bigger discussion. Should we, when it comes to creativity, be allowed to do whatever we want? On one hand, it's just a game. It's not actually happening. Real people aren't actually being hurt. People aren't actually destroying these monuments or these religious sites. Is it disrespectful? Maybe so. And I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find older Japanese games or other games that have done something similar when it comes to shrines. And in those cases, part of the appeal isn't because you can do it, but because it's an option. You know, it's irreverent. Is it really that big of a deal? In Grand Theft Auto, you can go around slapping the crap out of people and killing them. That's part of the appeal of the game. Like when I've been playing Grand Theft Auto and a girl could just be walking by me and I walk in front of her or she says something bad to me and I'm just like, you know what, fuck you, and I kill you and take your money. And you mow over people, you're trying to rob their car, they fight back, you mow over them. I mean, that's part of the appeal of the game. Like, I've blurred out some of this because you literally, like, I don't even know if I can show this on YouTube, but here's some of the scenes from Grand Theft Auto where you could just go around just killing innocent people.
You gotta have faith, man. Alright? Everything's gonna be okay. Like the therapist above says, man, it's gonna be okay. Alright? You gotta chill the hell out, man. Alright? Otherwise, it's not gonna be too good. You gotta enjoy life. Alright? Because.
Bruh, this is a school shooter's wet dream, I swear. Like, you don't have to do these things, but you can. And that's why GTA is so popular. Part of it is so popular because you have a choice.
I swear there's no more money.
There's an argument that games should allow this much freedom with zero censorship, and that's what we should be fighting for, right? And I do agree with that. On one hand, I really do. However, if you're a company that claims to be culturally sensitive and constantly makes itself as caring about diversity and not offending certain people, but then you don't keep that same energy for others, then yes, you kind of deserve the criticism. So then, does it mean that companies that are not bending over backwards to defend people or, you know, to be this sensitive should not get the same level of criticism when disrespecting a culture? I don't think there's anything wrong with people taking creative liberties with their games, but it's understandable if they get backlash when disrespecting another country's culture or getting aspects about that country so wrong that it can actually harm how the country or its people is viewed. For example, right, if a game were to take creative liberties by depicting all Mexican people, right, as rectangular village people who eat the scalps off Americans, yes, you can take creative liberty with that, but don't you think that would deserve backlash? I know it's a very extreme example, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. On the flip side, if you make a game where it's not just Mexican people or any real world culture in particular, this dystopian future where some bizarre faction of humanity, some weird random group eats the scalps off of regular human beings, and yes, that would be seen as more acceptable. But even then, you still have people who are going to be offended over it. No matter what you do, no matter how much creative liberty you take, no matter how much respect you show a culture, there will always be someone who finds something offensive. So I guess the question is, at what point do we draw the line and where? I guess the common consensus is that it should matter whether the interpretation is authentic and informed, or whether it reinforces harmful stereotypes. And when I say that, I mean exaggerated, like you're dehumanizing people, like these horrible depictions. Like, you wouldn't make a video game with Chinese women and their snatches being sideways, of course. Like, if it's a parody where everyone is being made fun of, that's a completely different thing. That would make sense. For example, if you made a video game with a stereotype for every single person, then it would be inclusive, and so it wouldn't be targeting one specific group. We even have dudes on YouTube that have these really funny stick figure type videos where they're just making fun of every different culture. Like, a different video is just stereotypes about one specific culture, and it's acceptable because they're making fun of everybody. It also matters whether or not the representation is exploitative. So, for example, in this case with Ubisoft, is a culture being used as an aesthetic or background setting without acknowledging its historical or social, the complexities of its society? The bad representation people are talking about right now is the game being set in feudal Japan, but made without understanding its history, the customs or the values, and basically the game just using it as a cool setting without enough substance. At least that's what most of the Japanese people are taking issue with. Maybe they take to heart a lot of the customs, but blatantly ignore others, and it's those ones that they ignore that turn out to be the issue. I think where people psychologically are able to accept certain creative liberties, it's a completely fictionalized world inspired by Japanese history but distinct from reality. I think Ghost of Tsushima is one of those things that took creative liberties but was still deeply respectful of Japanese history. But what if you made a video game about Tanzanian people or people from South Africa, and then when you make the video game, especially if the primary character looks nothing like the ethnic majority, whether or not that main character was based on history, and then you disrespect their culture and make every single one of them stupid, or you take their gods or aspects of their culture and develop the game in such a way that those things can be destroyed if the player chooses to, then would that be a violation? Then the commenter, even though he seems like a very ignorant individual, does kind of make a point, even though it sounds stupid, when he says you literally control the buttons you press, and if you decide to do that, it speaks more about you than the actual game. But in the broader scheme of things, if someone makes a video game and gives people the option to desecrate a shrine, is it left up to the player if they want to be a piece of shit? Like, should it be? So to play devil's advocate, how is this different from other games where you can choose to do evil and then reap the consequences of such things? When it comes to Assassin's Creed Shadows, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this. And honestly, the whole creative liberties that Ubisoft took with players being able to break things that are sacred to Japanese culture is the least of the argument, because if it is true and the player has the option to break it or not, the point of the matter is it's still their choice. So I guess you can make the argument that Ubisoft is doing what Grand Theft Auto is doing and giving the players complete control over what they choose to do. The game isn't being made in Japan, so it's up to America whether or not they want to do that. But if it's already being marketed as disrespecting so much about Japanese culture, then anything that comes after that is going to be scrutinized, rightfully so. Even if on its own, it wouldn't have been that much of a problem. I think the main thing that everybody can agree on, though, is that when the Japanese people are upset about how their culture is being portrayed and handled, you know, especially when it comes to, like, you know, in lieu of them, for the most part, Japanese people respecting American culture, especially now, maybe not back then, but now they respect American culture, and they even had to walk back on things that they were called out for being disrespectful to American culture, such as the whole thing with how they portray certain American characters. Then we shouldn't be condescendingly gaslighting them into being okay with how we choose to use their culture. That's a bad look, and it's kind of bordering on racism. Imagine doing that to other cultures and ethnicities right here in the US. And then when the members of those cultures or those groups speak up about it, we tell them shut up, that they're losers, and that these other cultures were okay with it and nobody said anything about that, so deal with it, right? if we want to, for example, trans people, right? That's a big thing in the US. If you start making every single movie about them going and popping up people in schools and like, well, this is how I'm going to represent all trans people now. And the trans people are like, that's kind of fucked up. Not all of us are like that. And they're like, shut the fuck up. You know, you don't have to do that. If you choose to play this freaking character, you choose to do it. We just developed it. It's your choice. It's the player's choice. You don't think that's immoral, but what do you guys think? Do you think that everybody's blowing this out of proportion and that Japan has no right to be upset about this because
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
And while they can be upset about historical inaccuracies in their culture, they shouldn't be upset about what players choose to do with aspects of that culture? Or do you think that there should be a line drawn with creative liberties and respecting the cultures of others? Do you consider it censorship if people who are designing these video games bow to other cultures? Because I guess they can make the same argument that in certain other Eastern cultures where marrying people underage, like 9-year-olds, is okay, and video games portraying this should uphold that if it's accurate to the culture, but then, you know, those people who are making the video game choose not to do it, and so it's offensive because they choose not to do it to that culture. I'm not saying this is the case, but let's use that as a hypothetical, right? Should the game developers then make that part of the culture so they don't offend that specific group that likes marrying freaking children? Like, should the game developers make that part of the culture so they don't offend that specific group by leaving it out and not being accurate? Is it considered politically correct when you try to kowtow to other cultures if you're going to use their culture, aspects of their culture, or is it seen as respectful? Is it going to stifle creativity even more if we hold video game companies to a certain standard? My main takeaway from this, my personal opinion, is that if you're going to talk about respecting people, you cannot then show unequal respect. You can't refuse to put in games the desecration of certain important monuments or shrines or what have you, but then allow that in another culture where you think it's okay. And then what doesn't help are people defending this by telling the offended party, i.e. the ethnicity or the people who are culturally affected by this, that they should just be okay with it because deal with it. Whether or not, like whether you want to believe their response was overblown or not, it's very disrespectful because at the end of the day, this country is using their culture, right? America is using the Japanese culture and exploiting it for money. But anyway, let's have a discussion because I like hearing different perspectives, and for all you know, I could be completely wrong.
The first black samurai is being featured in a video game, and now people want the definition of samurai changed. He wasn't a samurai, he was a retainer. Even though Yasuke is considered a samurai by the professionals who study history, and has been depicted as such in multiple pieces of media created by the Japanese specifically, for some audiences, a black samurai represents a glaring inaccuracy. It might disrespect Japanese culture with the provided historical inaccuracy. Benjamin Franklin never allied with assassins. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't even in Venice during that part of history. Some people that don't think Yasuke should be a playable character are expressing that opinion respectfully. But there's a very vocal group of lolly-loving, musty-mouth-breathing, deodorant-denying, fetishizing fiends that only care about accuracy when black people have the audacity to appear in fantasy. And they need to get over it or get some therapy!
What he's doing, level 1. What's the point? What's the point of having that option? Living in Europe and America as a Japanese, I do understand the idea of Asian. I do understand how we are seen and how invisible we are. But you know what? I won't shut up. Every time I post about the Assassin's Creed Shadow video game, I always get hate comments like calling me racist, and then some people say like all Japanese are racist. And why you care about the historical accuracy or blah blah blah? Or you don't like that because of Black Samurai? Really? You really don't see the disgracing for Asian people and Japanese culture in this game? We have Afro Samurai, there's no backlash, and yes, there's a historical inaccuracy, but what we care is that respect. Some people don't like the Resident Evil 5, the white character going to Africa and is shooting African zombie, but actually not all of them. But there's a white zombie too. But people don't like it. I get that. I get some people triggered. But if that's why this is okay, that's the things. That's why saying Asian hate is really overlooked.